Well, good evening, everybody. Yamalet, Tiabot, Mamjay, how is everybody this evening? Are we well? It's the three amigos here, as always. I'm assuming there are more of you coming out of the woodwork as we speak. It's a sad old evening. It is our last evening for some of us of 12. 12 evenings where I think after a while familiarity breeds contempt. I do apologise. Okay, what do you apologise? Oh, Paul! How do I look like Paul, Mamjay? Yes? He's fatter than I am and he's got strange coloured hair. Yes? And I get a kiss from Kate, you see. You see, it makes it all worthwhile. Anyway, what are we looking at this evening? Let's move swiftly on to what we're looking at. We want to look at your favourite and mine. Crikey. I don't know which is more shocking, the kiss from Kate or being called Paul. Yes? I'm shocked by both. Okay, but not necessarily to the same degree or in the same way. Right. So, we're looking at working capital management this evening. Now, working capital management comes up for between 15 and 25 marks, typically every single exam. I would suspect that maybe in this exam, and this is just a guess, we're going to have something like 15%, hey, 15% for working capital management, because I'm sort of suspecting that it's going to share a question with exchange rate risk. You know, forward market hedge, money market hedge, okay? So I don't think it will be a question in its own right. Now, Kerry tells me that she doesn't like this subject when it should be the easiest subject that we have, okay? Because there's nothing technical about working capital management. It is all about day-to-day management of cash. Now, hi Andy. So what makes it maybe challenging from the perspective of the exam? Now, here are a couple of things. What we often get are 4 equal questions. You know, 4 times 6 or 7 marks. Not always, but quite often. And why is this a challenge? Well, the reason why it's a challenge is that different parts of working capital management can be examined in each. And that means that you have to bounce from, say, an overview of working capital management to a bit of receivables management, to a bit of inventory, to a bit of financing. And so that bouncing from one topic to another, I think sometimes is a bit challenging. It means you don't have one large question, you have 4 smaller questions, and you just got to bounce from one to the next. Okay? So that's a very common thing that we tend to get. The other thing is this. It's 50-50. 50-50 in terms of computation and essay. And all I'm going to warn you, and I think I'm going to illustrate this to you, is that when we come to working capital management, the computation may be easy, may. But quite often the computation is awkward and difficult. And so my view is this. The thing you should do first in working capital management is the essay question. Get that out of the way. Or maybe the 2 essay questions, because they tend to be relatively straightforward. The fact is you can guarantee yourself marks with the essay questions in a way that maybe you can't with the computation. Okay? With the computation, you may find it's lovely and it just drops straight out in front of you. But as we will see, some of these questions are going to be slightly awkward. So those are a couple of issues with working capital. I would never do the working capital question first. I would typically, looking at the typical exam, do this as my 3rd question. Because normally, and of course every exam is different, the NPV question should be easier than this, and the question that includes WACC and things like that should be easier than this as well. Okay? But that's just my view. And of course, as my children tell me, my view doesn't matter. So, let us kick off with a little bit of an overview. You see, if the examiner wants to know the big picture stuff, he will talk about the two conflicting aims of working capital. And they are, firstly, we want to be profitable. And secondly, we want to be liquid. You see, when we look at working capital, and we look at things like current assets, you know, inventory and receivables. By increasing inventory or increasing receivables, will we increase profit? What do you think? Thank you, Mamjay. We will not increase profit. In fact, we will decrease profit because inventory will cost money in terms of storage. Receivables will have to be financed. So, profitability suggests that we wish to minimize the investment in working capital. The less working capital we hold, the more efficient we are, and hence the more profitable we will be. And of course, you could say that one thing we want to look at there is the operating cycle. You know, receivable days plus inventory days minus payable days. Very straightforward. The other side of the coin is liquidity. You know, the idea that we must be able to pay our bills as they fall due. And I hope we can see that there is a conflict between the two. Because the greater the investment in working capital, the more cash we will have to pay bills, the less investment, the less cash. And the sort of things that we would look at here would be our liquidity ratios. You know, the current ratio and the quick. The current ratio and the quick. So, simple overview, it's come up a number of times. The last time it came up, the examiner said, profitability, liquidity, which one's more important? And what you had to say was, well, they're both important. I suppose you could argue that profitability is our long-term aim and liquidity is our short-term aim, but maybe that's getting a little bit too sophisticated for me. Yes? So, we've had the pleasure of looking at our overview. What else can we talk about? Well, of course, we have the joy of looking at financing working capital. And when we look at financing working capital, in essence, what we really mean is financing the current assets within working capital. So what we have to do is we have to make a distinction between fluctuating current assets and permanent current assets. Now, just like everything in F9, if you are going to talk about these things, the most important thing you want to do first of all is to define, to show the examiner that you know what is what. So fluctuating current assets, simply these are the peaks and troughs due to change in activity over time. Whereas when we look at permanent current assets, this is the minimum level of working capital. So what we're suggesting is that there is a level below which working capital never falls. Now, given that we have those two, we then say, how would we fund these two? Okay? And of course, fluctuating current assets would be funded short term. And what's the reason for that? Could anyone help me? Why would we fund it short term?